Good morning. Here is your Intel report for Friday, November 25, 2022. Inside the Beltway. White House, nothing significant to report. Congress, the House and Senate are back in session next week. The Democratic House majority are pressing to pass several bills next month, including a budget bill that's due before a partial government shutdown on December 16. Domestic intelligence summary. Analyst comment. A possible rail strike as early as December 9 remains a short-term domestic concern. As previously noted, a rail strike will have second-order effects on prices for both energy and food, especially considering deteriorating freight trucking conditions. Less-than-truckload carriers are already beginning to offer voluntary furloughs for employees as costs are increasing and demand is decreasing. If high costs for trucking fleets continue to stay above demand, moving freight by truck that would have been moved by rail will become more difficult as companies take steps to cut costs or go bankrupt in the meantime. Oklahoma farmers warn of threats to production. Farmers in central Oklahoma are warning that high diesel prices could lead to shortages, in addition to other problems. One farmer speaking with a media outlet in Norman, Oklahoma said that fertilizer and diesel costs to run his combines add up to more than what he can get for his soybean crop this year. Global food and AG, several challenges continue to pose threats to U.S. and global food production. The average cost of the 5 top fertilizers is marginally receding but remains 2.5x higher than 2020 and slightly higher than this time last year. High heat and drought conditions continue to hit South America's growing season. Fertilizer availability also continues to plague farmers. Peruvian farmers have set up roadblocks over the past 3 days to protest high fuel prices and fertilizer shortages. Ukraine grain exports have been cut in half since the renewal of the UN-brokered grain deal due to poor weather and lingering uncertainty over escalation in Ukraine. Avian flu worst in history. According to the latest USDA numbers, outbreaks of avian flu have killed over 50 million poultry birds, making it the deadliest case in U.S. history. USDA officials are blaming migratory birds, such as ducks, for spreading the virus. Energy. U.S. distillate supplies for diesel and heating oil rose slightly over the past 6 weeks, a positive sign heading into potential winter shortages. Overall stocks are still 16% below the 5-year average. Rail unions align strike deadlines. The Brotherhood of Railroad Signalmen, BRS, who voted down a recent contract deal, announced that they will align their status quo period with the other unions, moving it to December 9. For rail unions, including BRS, are in negotiations until December 8. Commercial drones manufactured in China violate D.C. airspace. According to Acting Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security Samantha Vinograd, hundreds of commercial drones have violated flight restrictions in Washington, D.C. since 2018. The drones made by Chinese company Dejiang Innovations, DJI, include geofencing restrictions, but end users are bypassing flight restrictions and entering the special flight rules area around the capital. Lawmakers have proposed steps to address potential national security risks of the drones flying over the capital, including designating DJI as a national security threat and expanding the authority of federal agencies to detect and counter drones. McCarthy calls for Mayorkas to resign or face inquiry. House Minority Leader Representative McCarthy, Republican California, called for Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas to resign or face investigation from a GOP-held House that could end with his impeachment. McCarthy stated that he directed senior Republicans on the Judiciary and Oversight Committees to immediately launch investigations into border security and immigration when they chair their committees in January. Geostrategic Domestic Intelligence Summary. Russia-NATO Situation Report. Russian State Duma creates anti-woke police state. Russia's State Duma passed new civil laws targeting Western woke agendas, including imposing a fine on those who disseminate LGBTQ propaganda narratives or commit public actions that create non-traditional sexual attitudes, encourage sex change operations or pedophilic behavior. The laws provide tiered penalties with levels based on offense and status of the offender, with increased penalties for Russian officials and legal entities. Penalties double if behaviors target children or are disseminated through the internet or media and quadruple if both criteria are met. Foreign offenders face administrative arrests for up to 15 days. automatic expulsion from Russia, and tiered fines between 50,000 and 800,000 rubles. These laws are administrative rather than criminal, requiring an extremely low burden of evidence to prove accusations of spreading woke ideology. Such large fines are unlikely to be payable by the average Russian citizen, resulting in bankruptcy, which allows the state to seize control of their assets. This gives the state security services a means to purge dissidents from Russian society. Romanian-NATO air defense exercise. On Wednesday, Romania successfully repelled a simulated aerial attack from Turkish F-16s, French Rafale fighters, Spanish Eurofighters, and American E/A-18 Growlers using the French SAMP/T air defense system. The exercise is in response to the Russian war in Ukraine and part of a larger unnamed series of ongoing exercises in the European theater. China and Indo-Pacific Situation Report. China COVID policy devolves into widespread civil unrest. Chinese government authorities began a new round of COVID lockdowns amid a record high daily infection rate across numerous major cities. Foxconn, the major producer of Apple iPhone products, reportedly fired 20,000 employees at its plant in Zhengzhou after COVID-related unrest. As a result, Foxconn has decreased total production output by 30%. In the southwestern city of Chongqing, protesters confronted security forces demanding the government admit its mistakes. Reuters reported one protester was observed shouting, "Give me liberty or death," and "There is only one disease in the world, and that is being both poor and not having freedom," he added. "We have now got both. We're still struggling and suffering over a little cold." The man was later seen being bundled towards a police car by security personnel, prompting angry shouts from onlookers. China is facing a difficult internal security problem over its draconian COVID policies. Given the iron grip that the Chinese Communist Party has on its population, it is unlikely that these protests will result in anything other than disappearances and violent suppression. Comments by Chinese authorities about reforming the COVID policy appear to merely tinker around the edges of the oppressive measures, and foreign investors are increasingly concerned over the lack of production as the winter COVID season begins. China says NATO must stay inside its geographical limits. Speaking at a press conference, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian warned NATO to remain within its geographical limits and to stay out of the Asia-Pacific region. Zhao said NATO's expansion into cyberspace and outer space had led to increased intervention by the alliance in civilian concerns, including the Chinese infrastructure, technological, supply, health, and energy sectors. Zhao called on NATO to refrain from bringing ideological difference into economic and trade concerns and drawing lines based on values which don't fit with the international community's common interests, as these efforts would only backfire. U.S. VP Harris and Philippine President Marcos consolidate security alliance. During her recent three-day visit to the Philippines, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris met with Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. to discuss regional security and economic issues. Harris condemned China's strong-arm actions in Philippine waters and promised to increase joint military coordination to help Manila protect its natural resources from Chinese exploitation. Marcos responded by saying, "I do not see a future for the Philippines that does not include the United States." The U.S.'s Philippines relationship is on the mend after years of unstable Philippine leadership under former President Rodrigo Duterte. Expect significantly increased U.S. Philippine military cooperation and a likely friendshoring economic effort by Washington in order to cement bilateral ties with the key Pacific nation. China dumping U.S. dollars for gold. The People's Bank of China, PBOC, continues to sell dollars and replace them with gold. According to the World Gold Council, from July-September of this year, the PBOC quadrupled gold purchases, adding 300 tons to its reserves. Since February of this year, China has sold over $121 billion in U.S. treasuries and increased gold transactions 50 times the 2021 level. China is de-dollarizing its reserves at a moderate pace in order to protect its assets from Western sanctions. The move also facilitates China's President Xi Jinping's goal of increasing the use of the yuan in global trade and finance. Global Situation Report. U.S. sanctions Iran over ongoing dissident crackdown. the U.S. Treasury Department imposed new sanctions on Iranian security officials over human rights violations related to the crackdown on political protesters. A statement cited Iran's particularly severe security response to protests in Kurdish cities in northwest Iran. Iranian security forces have killed over 30 protesters in the past week, and social media images show security forces firing on protesters with live ammunition. The ongoing protests have pushed the security forces in Mahabad to the verge of being overrun. Unconfirmed social media posts show security forces using medium and heavy machine guns against crowds of protesters. IRGC and Basij paramilitary personnel are reportedly removing the bodies of dead protesters in an effort to prevent images of dead protesters being spread on social media. Expect the lopsided violence to continue until protesters either organize and begin fighting back with weapons or are beaten into submission by the security forces. Ghana orders oil purchases with gold. The government of Ghana this week announced that they'll be purchasing oil and gas products priced in gold instead of the US dollar. In preparation, the government also directed the country's major gold miners to sell 20% of their refined gold holdings to the central bank. Initial reactions of impending doom for the petrodollar have been off base. Facing the depreciation of their currency and a looming sovereign debt crisis, the Ghanaian government is trying to hold its US dollar reserves instead of depleting it to purchase oil. In short, this doesn't appear to be aimed at moving off the dollar system, but it has contributed to fears of a global rejection of the petrodollar. Venezuelan GOVT talks with opposition TO begin this weekend. Venezuela's government and opposition are preparing to resume talks this weekend after more than a year hiatus. The talks are a precondition to U.S. Department of State permission for U.S. oil giant Chevron to increase its investment and operations with Venezuelan state-backed energy company PDVSA. In 2021, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro suspended talks after the U.S. extradition of a businessman with close ties to the Maduro administration. Venezuelan oil is currently under U.S. sanctions over human rights violations. Reuters reported earlier this month that the U.S. was preparing to extend a license for Chevron contingent on talks over free elections and a social plan for approximately $3 billion in United Nations-administered funds. Easing U.S. sanctions on Venezuelan oil could increase availability and help decrease high gasoline prices in the U.S. and other sanctions participant countries. U.S. Navy exercises features drones and AI. On Wednesday, the U.S. Navy started its second Digital Horizon exercise in the Persian Gulf to develop its unmanned surface vessel, USV, fleet. Artificial intelligence programs are also being tested to facilitate the integration of so many unmanned vehicles. The Navy's Fifth Fleet, based in Bahrain, intends to have over 100 USVs operating by next summer. Experiments like this help to explain why there have been no large combatants from the U.S. Navy in the Gulf since 2021. Fifth Fleet's area of responsibility is predominantly shallow water with high-density maritime traffic. That type of operating environment hinders large combatants and favors the fast attack craft and heavily armed patrol craft used by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy. Fifth Fleet's move towards unmanned small craft will rebalance the scales in the area without having to sacrifice an amphibious readiness or carrier strike group. End report.